So this is the first session on SQL. So as part of today's session, we are going to discuss about the basics or fundamentals of database or SQL, all these things. So first of all, we need to understand what is DBMS, what is RDBMS, and what is a database, what is SQL. So we need to be very clear about these particular terms. Okay. So today is mostly theoretical part. So once we have understood basics, and then we'll slowly enter into the practical part. Okay. So first of all, let's start with what is DBMS and RDBMS. So before DBMS and RDBMS came into the market, so initial days, the data will be stored in the form of text files. So if you want to store data in some place, we need a kind of a file. So normally the data will be stored in the form of files. So that's called as a file management system. So in the form of notepad or sometimes in Excel files or Word files. So normally we store the data in the file. So that's called as a file system concept. So initial days, the people are storing the data in the form of files. But later point of time, what happens is the main problem in the file system is, so we cannot organize the data properly. Suppose if you want to retrieve some data based upon certain conditions, or if you want to apply certain number of joins or subqueries, all these things, so we cannot properly organize the data in the structured file or file management system. So if I store the data in the form of files, so organizing the data, we can just only for storage, but we cannot perform certain kind of operations on those file system. And then slowly Excel came into market. So in Excel also we can perform certain kind of things, but not exactly 100% operations. We cannot do that, and we cannot maintain the relationship between the data. And at later point of time, DBMS came into market. So in the DBMS means database management system. So DBMS means database management system. So this is a concept actually. So DBMS is a concept. So what the concept is saying is, we can store the data in the form of tables. So we can have some space in the hard drive, and the data can be stored in the form of tables. So that's a kind of a concept of DBMS. So DBMS is the data can be stored in the form of tables. So DBMS means database management system. So this is just a concept. So there are multiple rules are there. So, or there are different concepts are there. So Cod is a scientist. So who is created certain number of rules, how the DBMS should be, how this DBMS should work. So DBMS means database management system. So what database management system is saying, we can store the data in the form of tables in the hard drive. So we can store the data in the table, or we can store the database in the tables in the hard drive. So DBMS is a database management system where we can store the data in the form of tables. So if the data is available in the form of tables, means we have a rows as well as columns, right? So in that case, we can easily retrieve the data, and we can store the data, and we can refer the particular columns as well as rows if I align the data in the form of tables. So that is a concept is proposed by the COD in database management system. So that's the first database which is there in the market. And later point of time in the DBMS also they found some kind of issues, and to overcome the issues, again they have proposed one more concept called as RDBMS. So this is a little advanced than DBMS. So RDBMS. So what is RDBMS means? Relational database management system. So the same concepts are there, but additionally they have added something called a relational, because in the DBMS we can store all the data in one or two tables, but we should able to split the data in multiple tables, and we can establish the relationship between the tables. Suppose for example, I want to store the employee data. So if I store all the employee data in one table, which contains employees, names, salaries, designation, job, all these things, right? Date of birth or joining date, all the things. But instead of storing all the data in one table itself, and some data I can split it into some other table, and I can join those two tables. I can establish the relationship between those tables. So in that particular case, the retrieval of the data will be very faster, and we can also get the data very effectively. We can perform the operations very effectively. So then based on this particular principle, they have proposed another kind of system that's called relational database management system. So after DBMS, RDBMS came into market. So in the DBMS, and to satisfy this particular concept, there are some softwares are developed. And at that time, almost 20 years back, there are some top software called as a DBase and Fox Pro, right? Plus MS Access. So these tools are available. So these all the tools are comes under the DBMS softwares. So these are all basically databases which will support DBMS concept. So DBase, Fox Pro, MS Access, these are all the softwares which we can download and install. We can work with them. And later point of time, RDBMS came into market. So once RDBMS came into market, again there are some softwares that are implemented. That is Oracle is one of the software, and then MS SQL Server. MS SQL Server is one of the software, and DB2 is also one of the software. And then we have a MySQL is also one of the software. There are multiple softwares are available in the current market. Even MS Access also supporting the RDBMS features now, Microsoft MS Access. And these databases all comes from different companies. And some of them are open source and some of them are again licensed based. So the first relational database management system is Oracle. So Oracle is a software which is came into market at the first time. Then MySQL is also from the same company, and MySQL is a open source database. Oracle is a licensed paid. It's also open source is available, but if you want to use advanced features, we need to go and purchase a license. And then Microsoft SQL Server is there. So this is from Microsoft company, and DB2 is IBM company. MS Access is again from Microsoft company. So there are different companies. They have developed their database softwares to satisfy the RDBMS features. Okay, so after RDBMS came into market, then database plays very important role, and database become very popular to store huge data. So all the companies started using RDBMS software in their organization to store the data. Okay, so that's the basic concept of DBMS and RDBMS. DBMS is a very old technology. So in the nowadays market, no one is using that. So RDBMS is a latest technology. RDBMS, we have multiple database softwares are available in the market like Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, MS SQL Server, and etc. Right. So again, in the RDBMS, they have implemented a lot of features and keep on implementing so many features. But nowadays, what happens is in RDBMS also not able to hold the huge data set. Suppose if an organization, we have people in the thousands mostly, right? So it will not go to crores of data, right? But RDBMS software will able to hold certain limited data or certain amount of data. But we need to maintain the lot of servers like hardware servers. We need to hard disk. We need to have a lot of hard disks, and we need to increase the size of the memory to store more data, right? So that's the RDBMS. But in the nowadays, in the current system, RDBMS also not able to hold certain amount of data, because as soon as internet came into the market, so data is generating very hugely because of mobile phones, because of internet, because of social sites. So the lot of data is generating dynamically. Even in the Google also generating lot of data. So to maintain all of this data, this is basically huge data. And to maintain this particular data, RDBMS softwares are not feasible for that. So they cannot hold this much of data because they have to maintain a huge size of memories, hard disks. So that is not at all possible. So then big data came into market. So big data, NoSQL. So these are the latest technologies came into the current day market. But in still software development process, so still there are some products, or suppose if it's a standalone product or it is a web-based applications, still they are using backend as a databases, RDBMS software as a backend systems. But if you want to store huge data set like a big data, so what is big data means? It contains a huge data like Facebook account or LinkedIn data or Google accounts. So that data will be very huge. Traditional RDBMS systems cannot hold the data. So there is a certain technology should be there. Like Hadoop is one of the example for that. Okay, and Spark is another example for that. So that is again different stream. So those technologies came into market to maintain the huge data. But if you want to maintain some data like a certain limit, like if I want to an organization we have, so in the organization we have having some employees are working, or if a store market is there, there are some departments are there, some employees are working, or customers information if you want to maintain. So for all these things, RDBMS softwares are enough to store that kind of data. Okay, so this is a DBMS and RDBMS concept. So DBMS and RDBMS is a concept, a theoretical concept. So to satisfy those particular concept, there are multiple softwares came into market. So DBase, FoxPro, MS Access, or Oracle, MS SQL Server. These are all databases, actual software databases. Okay, so we need to buy that license for those particular software. We can install it and we can store the data in the form of tables. So most of DBMS, RDBMS softwares will be stored the data in the form of tables itself. So still though RDBMS softwares will store the data in the form of tables, and they will maintain the relationship between the tables. So they will maintain the relationship between the tables. So that is a concept of DBMS and RDBMS. Now, what is exactly database? So what is a database? So simply we can say database is a storage area. So database is a storage area. We can store the data in that particular space, a storage area. So we can store the data. We can simply say data storage area is called as a database. But where we can exactly use this database in your applications in software development. So if you go for any kind of applications or softwares, there will be 2 to 3 layers. So if I say 3 different layers, so for example, we have a front-end layer. This is a front-end layer, and there is a back-end layer. So the middle layer is optional. If it is a web-based applications, there will be also some middle layer is available. So this is called as an application server or web server. So normally what happens is this is a web server, or we can also call it as an application server. So business logic will be reside in this. Now this is the GUI mode. So graphical user interface. So customer or user will always interact with the GUI. So this application can be used by using any browser. So let's say I have opened some sign up form. So what I will do as a user, I will put some my first name, last name, date of birth, all this information. Now I'm submitting here. So as soon as submitting this data in the form, what is happening exactly is, so this data is taken by this logic. So in the business logic, there is some program will be written. So that program will capture this data, whichever user is sent, and that particular data will go and store in some location. So the third layer is required. So this is called as a database. So in the database layer, the exactly data will be present. Suppose the user want to retrieve the data. For example, you have logged into your banking account. You want to check your balance. What you will do is you will log in into your account, or you will log in into your internet banking application with your valid login data, with the login details. So once you are logged into your application, you can see whatever previous transactions you have done, like history of the transaction, balance, all this information. From where you are getting that information, and also you can generate the invoice and reports, all these things, right? So how you are getting the data means that data is present somewhere. You don't know, as a user, I don't know exactly where it is present, but the data is maintained somewhere. So that particular data will be there in the database itself. So from the data, it will fetch the data whenever you say some account number, and it will go to the database and it will fetch all the data related to that particular account and get the data, and same data will be present in the UI. So this is actually process will happen. So here the front-end applications normally developed by using HTML, hypertext markup language, or XML, or ASP.NET, or JSP. So there are scripting languages, or DHTML. So these are all scripting language. There are 2 kinds of languages. We have a scripting languages and programming languages. So basically the front-end, the buttons or UI links, all these things will be developed by using scripting languages, and the web logic will be designed by using C language, C++, Java, .NET, okay, C#. So by using these programming languages, they will implement this business logic. And the database can be either Oracle or SQL Server or MS SQL Server. So one of the database they will be installed on their server, and all the data will be go and store in this particular database. So this is actual concept where exactly database come into picture. Or sometimes you will have multiple database servers. So you have, suppose if the server is full, then you can maintain the another backup servers, and data will be stored in the multiple database servers. Even sometimes we have a multiple web servers, because if the load is more, one web server or one database cannot hold that load. So in that case, they can increase the number of database servers. They also increase the number of web servers. So this is exactly where database came into picture. So database is basically a storage area where we can store the data. And once we have installed this particular database software, it will automatically get some space from the hard drive, and our data will be stored in that particular space in your hard drive. So that is all about database. So now what is SQL? So suppose we have a database. So let us say I have a database. What is the database? Database contains the data in the form of tables. Let's say I have multiple tables in the database. So in these tables, I have lots of data. So I want to perform certain operations on data, right? So what kind of operations I can perform? Suppose I want to insert some data. I want to add some data, some table, inserting the data. Or suppose I want to update the existing data. Like I want to insert some data. I want to update the existing data. Or I want to delete some data. From the database, I want to delete some data. Or sometimes we need to retrieve the data. So by providing account number, it will give you history of the transactions. So that's called as retrieval or selecting the data. So if you want to perform these operations as a user, we need to communicate with the database. So we need to communicate with the database. But how we need to communicate with the database? We need to communicate with the database by using certain language. So we need a language. That language the database should be able to understand. So what is that language? As SQL, structure query language. So whenever the databases came into market, structure query language is designed by multiple companies. Like ANSI is the first company which is designed SQL. And whatever database I have used, or as I say, list of databases like Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, whatever, this language is the same. The SQL is the exact, almost 90% is same. Maybe one or two syntaxes will be changed, but maximum SQL is the same for all the databases. So if you learn SQL language, you can easily interact with any kind of database. It can be Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, DB2, or any other databases. Because SQL language is a common for all the databases. Slightly there may be some keywords will be different, but other than this, the concept is exactly the same. So SQL is a language by which we can communicate with the database. So why we need to communicate with the database? To perform these operations. Suppose I want to create a table. I want to insert some data in the table. I want to update existing data, or I want to delete the data, or I want to retrieve the data from the table. So to perform these kinds of activities or operations, we need a language called as SQL language, structure query language. Okay, so SQL is a language by which we can communicate with the database to perform certain number of activities. So that is called as SQL. So what is SQL? SQL means structure query language. Okay, structure query language, and shortcut we can also call as a SQL. Some people call SQL, and some people call them as a SQL. Structure query language used to communicate to the database to perform different kinds of operations. So that is all about SQL. So database is a storage area and where the data will be stored, and to communicate with the database we need a language that is called as SQL. So SQL is a language, generic language, which is common for all kinds of databases. If you learn this particular SQL, you can work with any of these databases. Okay, now so let's move on to the next one. So database components. So far we have understood what is database, and every database is having two kinds of components, client and server. So now I will talk about these components. What are those database components? So in real time, exactly what happens is every database is having two component guys. There's a DB database having two components. One is called as a client component. The other one is called as a server component. Client is one component, server is one component. What is this client and software or client and server? So basically server and client both comes under the database only, but server is responsible for storing the data. Actually in the server will store the data and the client will send the request to the data. So suppose I want to perform certain operations on this particular data. So in the server, the data will be there. So I want to perform certain actions or operations on this particular data. So I want to select some data. I want to insert some data in the server. I want to update some data. So we need to produce these commands. We need to provide this command to the server. From where we need to provide those commands? So we need another kind of layer from where we can execute this command. We cannot directly execute the commands on the directly in the server. So we need a kind of a tool from where we can execute your commands. And the client is a tool or component from where we need to execute all your SQL commands. So all your SQL commands will be executed from the client system. But before executing them, we need to connect to the server. So client software, these are also software. Server is a software, client is a software. So once you have installed Oracle database or once you have installed MySQL database, by default client and server both will be installed. But if you want to only install the server or if you want to only install the client, you can install only those softwares if you don't want both. So by default, if you install the database, you will get client and server both. But server is responsible for storing the data, and to retrieve the data or to perform certain operations on the data, we need a client software. So we need a client software. So server software required huge memory because it will store the data, and client is a very lightweight tool. It will not occupy much space. It is just a tool, small like a notepad or something like that, or notepad plus like that. So this simple editor will be provided. From there we can execute all your SQL commands, and those commands will be executed on the server side. Okay, so every database is having two components. One is client, the other one is server. So server have the data and client will send the request, or client will always perform certain operations on the data which is there in the server. And one more thing here is client and server will no need to be have in the same place. So server will be installed in some remote machines and client can be there in other machines. And we can have both in the same system, or we can separate them into multiple systems. But in the real-time environment, most of the time servers will be there in the remote systems. So you don't have database softwares installed in your local systems. You will be provided just your laptops, right? In your laptops, you don't have the servers, because in the companies there are n number of people will work on n number of things. They need a database, and huge number of people will access the database and they will create the tables. They do a lot of things, but you don't install the complete database server software in your local system. Okay, but in the real time, what happens is this server software will be installed on the remote machines. Either normally 90% of the times the server will be installed on Linux or Unix operating systems. So the database server will be installed on Unix or Linux operating systems most of the times. Windows is very, very rare, because Windows operating system most of the times will use as a client. Okay, so server data, because even Linux and Unix will be provided a lot of security, because the data is very, very sensitive, right? So if you compare with the Windows and other operating systems, so Windows will provide very less security than Linux and Unix operating systems. So in the companies, most of the times they will prefer Unix and Linux systems as a servers. So your database servers will be there in your Unix and Linux systems in the real-time environment. So now let us see this particular situation. So in real time, there are multiple people are working on database. So how these things will organized? So in the company, the database installed on the remote machine. Let us say this is my remote machine. So this is my remote server or machine. Here my database is there. So here my database is installed. This is database server. And now there are n number of people are trying to connect to the database. Like this guy is there, and this is another guy, and this is another guy. There are n number of people are working. So these people should able to connect to the database, and they will perform the activities on this database data. But how these people will connect to the database? So these people should install the client software only. So everybody should install the client softwares in their systems. And by using this client software, they can connect to the database server. So they will provide some details at the time of connection. So they will provide the name of the machine, port number, login details. And by using those details, our client softwares will connect to the database. And the client itself, editor will be provided. So there we can execute all the SQL commands. And those commands directly execute on the database through this connection. So client is very lightweight software, so we can install them in your local systems. But we never install the database servers on your local system. So individual people don't have the database server because this is very costly and it contains a lot of data. Your local systems become very, very slow if you install this particular software in your local system. Okay, so this is exactly happen in the real-time environment. So servers will be there in the remote machines, and you will be provided by connection details, and you have to install proper client, and through that client software you should able to connect to the database. So this is a concept of client and server. So every database, if you install MySQL, you will get client and server. If you install Oracle, you will also get client and server. If you install SQL Server, you will get client and server. So there are so many clients also there. Server is always one, but the clients can be anything. Okay, I will show you in few minutes how the clients will be, how the server will be. Okay, so one server, we can connect any client. Suppose if you see this particular scenario, the database server, let us say this is a MySQL. Let us say this is a MySQL database server, or let us say this is a Oracle. So this guy is using SQL Developer. SQL Developer is a client, and this guy is using a Squirrel client, or this guy will using Toad as a client, and this guy can use command line interface. So even clients there are two types of client. Command line interfaces are there, and GUI clients also there. So these people can use any different clients, but all the clients will be connecting to the same server. And all the clients require the connection details at the time of connecting to the server. Okay, so again, I discussed about client and server, right? So here, what is client and server? So server means can hold the data, right? So can hold the, or means server. So data is actually stored in the server. That is called database server. This is database server. So normally this will be in the remote machines. So most of the times it will be there in the remote machines, and you will be provided the connection details. With those connection details, you will be able to connect. So data is actually stored in the database server. But what is the use of client? We can send SQL commands using client software. So what are the examples? Suppose if I take Oracle is a database server, for that there are n number of clients are there, like SQL Developer, and again clients are, there are two types of clients. So two types of clients. So some people will like to work on UI, and some people will like to work on command prompt. So that is up to you, whichever client you are going to choose. But the ultimate goal is same. So all the clients, we can use it for executing our SQL commands. So there are two types of clients again. So some of the clients are graphical mode. So graphical mode they will use. This will provide you GUI. All the tree structure, buttons, UI, everything will be there. It will be just MS Word document or Excel sheet document. And there are other clients will be there, that is called command line, CLI clients. We can say CLI means command line interface. So there are two kinds of tools are there. But when I use graphical mode of client, we no need to remember any commands. So all the things will be there itself. We need to just know how to use them. But when you work with the command line interface, you need to type all the commands manually. You have to remember a lot of things. Okay, so some people will feel difficulty in working on CLI mode. Some people will like graphical mode. Some people will like command line mode. So these are the two different clients are available for any database. Any database, even MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, any database having two different type of clients: graphical clients, and we can also say GUI clients and CLI clients. Now I will show you a few examples. So for example, if I take Oracle as a database software, this is also from Oracle company. So if the Oracle database, if I take, there are so many clients are there. So for example, let's say SQL developer. So these clients by default you will get once you have installed the databases. So or else if you don't have, you can also install these clients separately. You can download these clients and you can install separately. So for Oracle database, SQL developer is a one of the client, and this is a default client, and SQL plus is a command line interface. So this is a GUI client and this is a command line client. So there are multiple clients are there. So this is a GUI client. So this is a graphical user interface client, and this is a CLI client. So we'll see only a command prompt where we need to execute all the commands, SQL plus. And we can also connect some third-party clients, but these two are the default clients of Oracle. And we can also other tools like we have a Toad is available. Toad is another client. TOAD, Toad is available, and then we have a Squirrel is available, and many more there. So so many clients are there. So, but a SQL developer, SQL plus, these two are the default client. By default, whenever you install your database, by default, you will get two clients. One is GUI client, one is CLI client. But other clients, if you want to use, you have to download and install them. But by default, if you install any database, you will get one GUI client, one CLI client. So if you install Oracle, you will get SQL developer client and SQL plus client. One is GUI, one is CLI. And suppose if you install MySQL as a database, you will also get one GUI client called as a workbench. This is a GUI client, SQL MySQL workbench. We can call it as a MySQL workbench. MySQL workbench. This is a GUI tool, and we no need to write more commands there. It's very simple to use it. And the command line client is, we have MySQL command line is also there. So MySQL command line tool is also there. So this is a CLI client. This is a CLI client. And in the MySQL, we can also use Toad, Squirrel. These tools we can commonly use for almost every database. Even we have Aqua Data Studio also there. This is also more popular client. Okay, so because these are the generic tools are available, guys. So by using these tools, we can connect to the any database. Aqua Data Studio is also there. So by using these tools, we can connect to the any databases, not only specific database. Okay, Squirrel, Toad, Aqua Data Studio also supported multiple companies. These are the generic clients of the case. So these are nowhere related to MySQL, Oracle. So Oracle and MySQL by default will give you some clients. But if I don't like those clients, we can also go for another third-party client. So these are the third-party clients are available. Okay, by using those clients also, we can connect to the any databases. All right. So this is all the concept of SQL Server. So server and client. So these are the two components. So we have seen what is a client and server. So server is basically storage area where the data will be stored. And the client is a software which we need to use to write our SQL commands, to connect to the database and write your commands. That's all about a client. Okay. So now we will see a few more important database and schema I will talk about later. So here I will talk about this. So first now, so far we just discussed about the concept. So we understood what is DBMS, what is RDBMS, what is database, what is exactly SQL, and what is client and server. So these are the fundamental topics which we need to understand before going to use databases. Okay. So now throughout my series of sessions, I am going to use MySQL as a database, because Oracle also we can use it, but Oracle is a little bit complex to install in your system. So that's the reason I'm just choosing MySQL as a software. So we can just download this and you can install MySQL in your system. On Windows, you can work with that. So moreover, this is an open source software. So MySQL is a open source database software which is available in the market. So now I will show you how to install MySQL, how to download and install MySQL software in your system. And I will show you two clients. As soon as we have installed on MySQL, we will get two clients. One is MySQL Workbench and MySQL command line tool. So all the SQL commands we are going to execute in Workbench or command line tool. Okay, so once we have installed MySQL software, then I will show you how these clients will work, how to connect to the database server by using these clients. And even though if you have a database server in your local system, we should use client to connect to the database. So sometimes, suppose in my case, if I install MySQL, I will get the client and the server both in my same system. But in that case also, we need a client software, we need a server software. Both will be there in the same system. In that case also, we need to use client software to connect to the database and executing your queries. All right. So now we will see how to install MySQL database on your Windows operating system. And then I will show you what is Workbench. This is a default client of MySQL. This is a GUI client. And also I will show you command line interface. Both I will show you, Workbench as well as command line tool. So once we have understood this, then I will show you few important things, how to connect to the database, how we can see the tables, how we can see the databases, all these things I will show you now. Okay. So let's start with the installing SQL, MySQL. So throughout my sessions, I'm going to use MySQL as a database because SQL is a common language for every database. If you learn SQL in MySQL, tomorrow if you're working on Oracle, still the SQL is same. And if you are going to work with MS SQL Server, again SQL is same. Okay, so once you learn the SQL, you can work with any other databases. You will not see much differences, but maybe 1 or 2% syntactical differences will be there, but almost everything is the same. Okay, so now I'm going to install MySQL on my Windows operating system.